Can you hear me? Can everyone hear me? I know you all can hear me. Great. So the function of tonight's meeting, the City of Bowie, as many of you are aware, has always had a city lobbyist. This is a pretty standard practice in local government. We'll hire people to basically be our full-time representatives to other layers of government, in particular state administration, so the governor and the many agencies that we deal with, as well as, of course, the Maryland General Assembly, the 188 lawmakers who have an awful lot to say over our lives. We've been working with our lobbyists earlier this year to put together our legislative agenda for the upcoming Maryland General Assembly session, which will begin January of next year. Tonight, we're going to be discussing a document that includes a broad overview of the issues that we want to focus on in the upcoming General Assembly session. We've had a couple of meetings so far where basically we've had some candid conversations about the fact that the state of Maryland had a substantial budget surplus last year, which has now turned into a budget deficit. And the governor, as well as legislative leaders, have already begun signaling pretty unambiguously that funding is going to be very hard to come by in this upcoming year, especially for capital programs, which we and many other municipalities and many other counties and many other organizations and agencies are all going to be competing for. So that being said, we wanted to put together a budget priority earlier this year so that we could give our government relations team a current kind of an early head start in working with the administration on some of the following priorities. Among the budget priorities that we previously discussed were new funding streams for the city's water pipes. So many of you will be familiar with the fact that Bowie has 93 miles worth of water distribution system. The system is about 60 years old. It's managed through the City Public Works Department and paid for and funded through water and sewer fees that residents pay. The system is very old. It's iron built, and as many of you are aware, especially in Levitt Bowie, over time the iron buildup in the water can result in a discoloration, especially when there's a change in water pressure. So many folks in Levitt Bowie have experienced the red or the brown water. The city's been embarked for 5 years now on a long-term project to begin replacing the whole system. We have replaced several miles of pipe so far. It's about $2 million a pop, and we got, I think, 89 miles to go. So it's expensive. The mayor, working with our federal lawmakers, was successful in obtaining some funds from the federal government through many of the last spending rounds at the federal level to help accelerate some of our pipe repair projects, which is excellent. It's really, really good news. But there's still a lot more that we need to do, and will be for a very long time. So the first one we discussed was additional funding support for the tuberculation, which is ultimately the iron buildup in the water, and additional funding to replace the pipes. The second one is discussing police recruitment and incentives. As many of you are aware, police recruitment is a major challenge. There are 17,000 law enforcement agencies in the United States, many of them headquartered within a stone's throw of Bowie, and recruiting law enforcement is a challenge. Last I saw, police academy attendance about 2 years ago was down 90% locally, at a time when agencies are all struggling to hire. And so Bowie has had a long-standing practice of ensuring quality over quantity. We are big believers in making sure that every single person in our agency is someone that we trust and someone who will do a good job for our citizens. But that can often result in staffing shortages. We're slated for 65 officers right now. We have 52 currently, one in the academy. The other challenge we have is retention. We are one of the better municipal police employers in the region. Our salaries are very competitive with other municipalities, but it is not very easy to compete with federal agencies who are just able to outmatch us on salaries. And so unfortunately, a lot of our officers, a few years into the job, start getting headhunted. And so that's a challenge. Our retention overall is not bad compared to a lot of other departments, but that remains a challenge. And so one of the things we'll be talking to our state lawmakers about this cycle is police recruitment incentives through the form of grants, funding, support, or other programs that we could participate in. The other bit is capital improvement programs for the city's capital budget. So every year we put together our budget, including our capital budget, for all of our major spending programs, everything from fixing the amphitheater at Allen Pond to replacing the existing city ice arena, These are all things that have been in our capital budget for a long time. We've been slowly making our way through those programs, but as always, we'll be asking for support for those particular items. One thing that was added, courtesy of, I believe, the gentleman in the front row here tonight, was specifically looking for support for fire equipment for the Bowie Volunteer Fire Department. As the nation transitions to more electric vehicles, which is a very good thing for the world, very good thing for the environment, very good thing for local emissions and our carbon footprint, there are absolutely trade-offs. One of those trade-offs is that in rare instances there are electrical battery fires. When a standard combustion engine car catches fire, it's a pretty frightening thing. But most most fire departments are accustomed with standard methods to deal with standard combustion engine car fires. Battery electric fires are a different animal entirely. And there have been some really eye-opening incidents around the country about what happens when electric batteries do combust. It is an entirely different animal dealing with those particular fires. And so we've had some residents who have been very focused in working with our volunteer fire department and making sure that they have the equipment and training they need to deal with those particular fires. We happily have a high proportion of Bowie residents compared to other parts of the country that drive electric vehicles. We see a lot of Teslas and other electric cars plugged in driveways all over the city, which is great. But with that comes the responsibility of ensuring we know how to deal with emergency situations when they arise. And so that's been another one that's been added. Those are the main things that we've had on the budget priorities. Before I move on, I want to give my colleagues an opportunity. Councilmember Hawkins and Wolfley are online, and Councilmembers Gardner and Truesdale are here with me tonight. Does anyone have any questions or thoughts on any of the things on the existing budget priorities we just discussed? Councilmember Wolfley, we're struggling to hear you. I don't know if it's a tech problem on our end. Oh, try again, Councilmember Wolfley.
Can you hear me?
There we go.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Outstanding. Very much appreciate it. No, those are we spoke about those items previously, and I concur with all of them. Obviously, the tuberculation continues to be a major issue. And police recruitment, whatever's out there, we need to be pursuing. And of course, capital programs, very important. We've got a nice laundry list of things that we could perhaps get some assistance with. So I'm good with all those items.
Thank you, Councilmember Wolfley. Councilmember Hawkins or Gardner or Truesdale?
Yes, thank you, Councilmember Staff and Councilmember DeFore Wolfley. Thank you both. Yeah, I am completely fine with these items. In fact, I'm proud and very happy to see that everyone is supportive, and where we have tuberculation as the #1 item, because we still have a number of residents in District 2 who complain of brown water. So we definitely need to target that as #1 priority. And of course, we want to provide public safety, ongoing public safety, in supporting our police department and of course our volunteer fire department. Those guys definitely put their lives on the line daily, and we need to be supportive as much as possible. So if we have our lobbyists working hard with our legislators in the governor's office, we should be able to get to some funding to where we could be more supportive as in the past. Thank you, Councilmember and staff.
Thank you, Councilmember. I think we all received a copy of the remarks from Mayor Pro Tem Ndi Bumadu. It looks like there's some notes basically attached to things that we discussed previously. And then it looks like there's also some discussion of land use zoning authority, workforce development, housing, something that I know we worked with our lawmakers on last year. I have no objection to including workforce development housing discussions in the mix with our lawmakers. And then I think she also specifically references ensuring that we continue to work on exploring funding for the Bowie solar farm. Staff currently, so for those of you who don't know, the city initiated, I think, a first in the nation local solar program several years ago, where we currently are operating a solar farm off of Route 214 that is helping the city to offset its climate footprint. It's a part of our reaching zero emissions in the next few years. We're working on a second solar farm at the moment, and off the top of my head, where do we stand with that right now?
So that is currently going through design and ultimately permitting. We actually have an agreement already in place in regards to funding that. We have what was referred to as a power purchase agreement. So that is an agreement that is already set with the provider of the solar facility in regards to how we're going to be financing that. So this item in here would not be applicable to our existing plans.
Understood. And then there's also a comment from Mayor Pro Tem Ndé Bumadu about land use and zoning authority. I know this is something we have discussed before. As I understand it, this would more be a conversation with our county lawmakers first, I suspect. And I'm getting some nods from staff. Okay. So I definitely want, to Councilmember Ndé Bumadu's credit, she's definitely, I think everyone's on the same page about this one, and it's something that we will definitely follow up on. With our county lawmakers, and that is something we can include our government relations team on, just not as it relates to our state lawmakers right now. Okay. On the policy priorities, we included the Police Accountability Board, which was the top issue for MML last cycle. This is related to local agencies being able to establish essentially their own accountability boards as it related to state legislation, I believe either last year or the year prior. The other is the Maryland Horse Racing Act. Many of you will be familiar with the Bowie racetrack facility, which is currently owned by the Stronach Group, also known as the Maryland Jockey Club. Back in 2020, there was a sort of major bill in the Maryland General Assembly related to horse racing generally in the state of Maryland. It applied to the three major horse racing facilities, Pimlico in Baltimore, Laurel, and then our Bowie racetrack. The essence of the legislation is that the Maryland horse racing industry essentially needs a major cash infusion to be able to continue to function. The state at the time passed a $400 million bill, which involved major renovations of Pimlico, moving horse training to an upgraded facility at Laurel, and then as a footnote in that bill, or I guess a minor part of that bill, an agreement that the Maryland Jockey Club would turn over the Bowie racetrack to the city of Bowie, which we would use jointly with Bowie State University for recreational purposes. And there were specific state zoning that went into place that limited the types of activities that could go there. We entered into an MOU successfully with Bowie State University, and then separately created a joint task force with them, as well as Maryland National Capital Park and Planning and local stakeholders, which just delivered its report a few weeks ago. It's a very good report. I encourage you to go back to previous meetings and look it up. They did excellent work. So we are pretty much set on that. The one challenge is that this past legislative cycle, at the tail end of the last General Assembly session, Chairman Gazzone introduced a new bill that essentially delayed any decisions related to the Maryland Horse Racing Act by 1 year. There were concerns that the $400 million that would be infused for Pimlico and Laurel were not sufficient, and that they might need $800 million instead. As time has gone on, and with inflation and costs being a bit higher than projected. And so the legislature basically punted and gave themselves 1 more year and have created a separate, a new horse racing authority essentially to help sort out what they're going to do. And so right now, while the City of Bowie, Parks and Planning, and Bowie State have worked very well together and we have a plan in place and ready to go, we are unfortunately going to have to work very closely with lawmakers this cycle to see what ultimately comes of the Maryland Horse Racing Act, and make sure that whatever happens, we continue to advocate for the best possible outcome for the Bowie racetrack. And we will be doing that in partnership with Bowie State and Maryland National Capital Park and Planning. Councilmember Wolfley added PFAS testing to our discussion a few weeks ago. This relates to existing standards for PFAS testing. I can't remember what PFAS stands for, but I believe it relates simply to the plastic degradation. As you're all aware, medical science is discovering plastic in human lungs and tissue, and it's all very concerning. And so this is an issue that we're going to be following as well. And then Chesapeake water quality controls is the last bit. Many of you will be familiar with many of the very large holes that the city of Bowie dug all throughout the city to help deal with stormwater management. We are continuing to work on stormwater management related projects to help ensure that all the water flow that's coming out of Bowie and going into the Chesapeake is as clean as possible. And we'll be dealing with the state on working on those standards going forward. Those were our main policy priorities. Any questions from any of my colleagues?
Yes, I did. Thank you, Councilmember Steph. And great overview. Great overview. I want to. My question is about PFAS testing. If staff could give us some background as to exactly what that is, because I have no idea.
So PFAS, what it stands for is polyfluoroalkyl substances. Essentially, the common nomenclature for it is forever chemicals. So they are a series of chemicals that don't break down naturally in the environment very well, and they can make their way into water systems. So there has been some testing in the area, and Bowie's water is not one of the areas of large concern for PFAS within the water system. However, this is of concern for water systems in general in regards to what to do about them. They can be tested and they can be identified in water systems, but the concern is what happens in regards to regulations that may come along for removing PFAS from water systems. Quite frankly, it's difficult, it's expensive, and it's a challenging thing to do. So there will be additional regulations coming down in regards to water systems and dealing with PFAS. We don't think it's going to be something that is going to be impacting Bowie right away, but it will be impacting us at some point, just as it will water systems all over the country that are trying to get a handle on these forever chemicals that have found themselves into the environment.
Okay.
Well, maybe next week,
And Mr. Gardner, if I'm sorry.
we could
Mr.
get
Gardner,
Jose to,
go ahead. City manager, please, go ahead.
maybe we get Jose to come to the next meeting and give us an engineer's perspective on this particular situation. And I know that there's been some problems in the Westminster area, and is my understanding, and which prompted this situation. But Jose is our waters guy, and we can get him to come to the next meeting and talk about that, or future, or in October.
And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that our focus with PFAS was mostly just to monitor the study and the legislation that's coming down the pike, mostly because this is just an emerging issue. So
Okay.
there
That
wasn't
is-
like an imminent problem we were dealing with. I'm sorry, Councilman Wolfley.
Yeah, let me shed a little light on it. The concern I raised was one specifically about that, which is monitoring the environment for what's coming our way, and ensuring that if there are going to be regulations, that there are regulations that we can in fact comply with, and that aren't too onerous and burdensome for the operators of these facilities. We certainly want to ensure that all of our drinking water is safe, but at the same time, we don't want to be in a position where we have, testing burdens that are too onerous for us. In terms of requiring equipment or what have you, is there going to be additional support from the state level to cover some of the expenses? All of that sort of thing. This is an emerging issue, and that's really what why it's on the policy priorities. It's a monitoring and ensuring that we have a seat at the table if and when there is something that's proposed. Same thing happens on the Chesapeake water quality goals. The state has recently announced that, or I should say the Bay monitoring programs have announced recently that we've not met our goals, and it's not just a Maryland thing, it's a collective, Pennsylvania, Maryland, Virginia, Delaware, that the Bay has not met the goals that had been set. And the concern we have is that we've been working diligently and have done our part. Councilman and staff mentioned about all the holes we've dug around town to improve the water quality. And we've been doing our due diligence on this, and we want to ensure that any remediation for future activities doesn't adversely affect us, given how successful we've been. We want to just keep an eye out for that. So again, that's an emerging policy concern, not one that's got a specific goal at the moment, but keep monitoring and let us know if there's anything that's coming our way. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Wolfley. I think Councilmember Hawkins had something.
Yes. Thank you, Councilmember Stebb, and thank you, Councilmember Wolfley, for bringing the PFAS testing issue to light. This is something that I've worked on in Annapolis, and this is an emerging issue in multiple veins. My understanding is that the Maryland Department of Environment is either getting ready to release a report, or they already have released a report that should shed some light on where Maryland is with regards to PFAS. So I would ask that our consultants take a look at that, and you know, if there's anything relevant to us, anything we need to be on the lookout for, whether it's with regards to compliance or with regards to the Tucson River, you know, please be on the lookout for that. And thanks again, Councilman Wharton.
Thank you, council members. Anything else, council members Gardner or Truesdale?
Yes, I just want to thank city staff for and thank you, council member staff, for this information. I was not aware of PFAS to the extent of the importance of it, but I appreciate city staff for bringing in some of the staff that we will be able to kind of get more in light in this issue. Appreciate it. That's it.
Yes, Mr. City Manager.
Well, two things. The PFAS and the Chesapeake water quality issue. One of the concerns that I have is the mandates that come down from the state don't have funding with them. It's a directive that which we bear. If you look at our budget, and you all know that we paid for all those holes that were dug and all the things that were done in order to keep our permit functional. So that's one of the concerns.
Sorry, Mr. City Manager. Councilmember Wolfley, you are not on mute at the moment.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Sorry, go ahead, Mr. City Manager.
One thing that we did not touch on was the historic property renovation component. Is that something you all want to proceed with?
This was under budget priorities, Mr. City Manager?
Budget priorities, yes.
One moment.
Historic properties renovation, parentheses, White Marsh?
So this is under capital improvements and green spaces. Okay,
Yes.
so this is one of the additions. So White Marsh historic property renovation specifically. Oh, so this would be referring to the old historic manor, the brick house that's falling apart.
Right.
I was not aware that we were pursuing renovation. I thought that we had settled on demolition. Am I wrong about that, city staff?
Well, what we've done is isolated it and to determine what we can do with it. We would have to get permission to demolish it, but that decision hadn't been made.
Okay.
I think it was,
That decision came about prior to COVID, and we were going to be going through that year with working on efforts to market the property, try and see if there was another user, and quite frankly, the pandemic got in the way of a lot of those efforts. So it has not come back to get rebudgeted for demolition or another plan since that time.
Am I wrong in thinking that there's like a whole side of the building that's falling off?
Essentially, the outer walls are moving away from the interior of the structure.
That seems like a problem. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd like to pursue monies for renovation. I wouldn't want to demolish that. I mean, if it's a historic property, we want to preserve some history.
Okay.
still working on making sure we get all the permissions so that we
Understood. So it sounds like no decision is imminent about demolition. We basically have isolated the property, so we have the
It's a-
option of pursuing renovation if we
And
want
we're
to.
keeping it
And
safe.
Councilman
Correct.
Gardner is seeking assistance from the state and perhaps
For renovation.
funds being available. Okay.
Exactly.
If there are no objections from council members Hawkins or Wolfley or Truesdale, I think that can be included without any issues. Am I seeing nods? I'm seeing nods and thumbs up. Thank
Thumbs
you.
up. Can't beat that. That's it.
And then, while we're on budget, I apologize, I did actually overlook a note from Mayor Pro Tem Ndé Bumadu. I wanted to make sure I did it justice since she wrote in. On the police recruitment incentives, Councilmember Mayor Pro Tem Ndé Bumadu references wanting to make sure that we do not neglect basically a holistic approach specifically to police recruitment, and essentially try and work in partnership on improving police pipelines generally. And I think she's right on the money with that. I think that's consistent with our past conversations about
Yes.
policing. The state just set up a cybersecurity, I believe, task force or workforce intended to deal with cybersecurity talent pipelines. There may be similar efforts this coming legislative session related to law enforcement and other fields. And I think we're agreed, and our government relations team has instructions to make sure that any such efforts we are actively a part of and ideally leading, since we are, I think we have one of the larger municipal police departments in the state. If there are no other comments or objections from my colleagues, I think we're all good. Yes, Mr. City
I have
Manager.
one issue aside from this.
Yes, sir.
With regard to the renovation of the council chamber for audio production and such, we cannot guarantee that it'll be ready for operation next week. So we recommend that we move the next week's meeting to Ken Hill to accommodate the large number of people that are going to be coming. It's going to be a really busy evening, and this room would not accommodate 50, 60 people and people standing outside.
Okay.
The problem with that, or the restriction, is that it's not that, we do not have Teams capability over there and won't have it next week. So everybody would have to be present for the meeting.
If we are going to move to Ken Hill, let's make sure we do three things. One, let's make sure we start communicating immediately that that's where the next meeting will be,
Yes.
since we know for sure that a lot of folks are going to walk,
Right.
and probably myself, by the way, are probably going to walk through that door at 7:55, forgetting that we're at Ken Hill. So let's make sure we start the communications early. Two, let's also make sure in our communications with the public, we're reminding everyone that they can submit comments in advance to cityclerk@citybowie.org.
Good point.
If necessary, depending on the feedback we get, perhaps, I apologize in advance, Madam City Clerk, but perhaps we could read comments that night if we have, folks who want to be heard and not just included in the record, just to make sure everyone feels included. We did that during the pandemic, and I think we could lean on that
She set the record that night.
that evening, depending on what kind of feedback we're getting and whether we have too many folks that couldn't make it. As long as we do those two things, I have no objections with Ken Hill. Do any of my colleagues have any thoughts on moving to District 2 for next week?
Well, the reason why I brought it up tonight, so that we would have a solid week to advertise it.
Yeah.
Because we don't want to surprise anybody
No.
with any surprise meetings. And certainly we have a strong marketing team. We can market that over the next week. And we will certainly, with the projection, be ready for the 18th. And I've spoken to the technicians. I believe that we will certainly be ready for then, but we don't want to press them, plus the long weekend, and then not be able to make it and have to make a quick change. But we can, that was the council chambers before, it was used, so we want to do it there, and just because we won't be able to do teams.
Understood.
And the audience at home, pardon me, I'm sorry.
Will we be,
The audience at home, will they be able to?
Yeah, we'll be.
View everything?
Yeah, it's on
Yeah.
YouTube and all that.
So
That
no issues.
aspect of it would be the same.
Okay.
It's just
will we be able to
Control teams,
use
it's
the
not.
large room,
Okay.
or will it be the old council chambers?
It's the larger.
the large room.
The multi-purpose room? Okay.
Excellent, thank you.
Councilmember Hawkins, all good with our Ken Hill location?
It's a little bit further drive.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
All right,
I might have to pull out my bike, but
All right.
other than that,
all right.
I appreciate it, sir. With that, we'll be at Ken Hill, and I think we're understood that even if the mic situation here is fixed, we'll remain at Ken Hill, assuming that we're advertising that
once
location.
we
We don't want to pull
advertise
up
it, I
the
wouldn't
road.
change
It's going to be
it.
bad enough that it's a Tuesday night meeting, and a lot of us are going to be confused already.
Absolutely.
Never mind changing the location on folks as well. I'm
There
going to
you
probably
go.
walk in that door Tuesday night and forget, so it's okay.
Excuse me, question, do you have a timeline for this week that may be a cutoff to where you would know that?
We're right there now.
We right there, okay.
So we want to make the decision.
It's gonna be
Yeah, right there now.
Okay.
Let's go to
Because
Ken Hill.
with our residents, we need to give them a week.
Yes.
And yeah, so just plan it, I recommend we just plan to do it now,
I
so
agree.
that if
So we
we
just
wait
move on,
Thursday,
it's done.
Yeah.
then it's gonna,
It's just
we'll
done.
get complaints. There'll
Gotcha.
be a
So it's
lot
done.
of,
There are other things to pick up. So,
Yeah.
yeah, let's just make that decision.
we're lucky to have an alternate facility like that.
Absolutely,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
agree. Almost another form of redundancy.
Yes.
All right.
Great city.
With that, is there anything else from staff?
Could I make a request for your motion on the legislative priorities? When you make the motion tonight, could you please enumerate them, since we're working off a couple of documents, to make sure that we get what the priorities are in motion format? We'd appreciate that.
Understood. Would one of my colleagues like to make a motion to approve the 2024 legislative priorities as outlined in the most recent priority document that we are looking at tonight?
And the point of enumerating is because we got the supplemental document that came in, so if we can just speak out what each of the priorities are
So the
off of both documents.
Oh, boy. Okay.
Yeah, I know, it's a big task.
Would someone like to take a stab at such a motion?
So I actually have a question before we entertain a motion, if that's possible.
Go ahead, council member.
Mayor Pro Tem's, I guess, point about workforce or senior housing funding, are we adding that in as well?
Yes.
Yes.
You all agree to that.
Yes.
Right.
You all agree to all of her, except the solar farm.
Well, no.
And that land use would be a county issue.
Right.
Yeah, that county issue, yeah,
Right.
exactly. Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you, council member. Would someone then like to state a motion?
I'd like to move to approve budget priority items for 2020 legislative cycle. First item being tuberculation funding streams. Second being police recruitment incentives. Third being capital improvement projects for green space
And our other capital projects?
and our other capital projects such as the ice arena equipment, police, and utilities, as well as our historic property renovation of Mike Whitemore's, our house there. Also, item number 4, fire equipment for Bowie Volunteer Fire Department to address electrical vehicle fires. Those are the budget priorities.
And then we also want to include the workforce development housing.
Yes,
uh,
in the workforce
okay.
housing development, workforce development housing for 55 and older.
And then do we want?
Those are the budget priorities. Did you want to take the policy ones, Clint?
Yeah, why don't we go ahead and state policy ones as well, if you want to do that, Mr. Truesdale?
Yes, make a motion for the policy priorities for the police accountability.
Oh,
If we're gonna make it two separate motions,
So
then
then-
we need to.
A second.
second. Yeah, so you want a second? You want a second
Then
mine?
we'll have a separate motion for the policy priorities.
I second the first motion. First motion.
First motion.
Yes.
All right. The budget priorities motion has been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signal by saying aye.
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 All opposed? Motion passes. Mr. Truesdale, if you'd like to make a motion on our policy priorities.
Yes, I'd like to make a motion on our policy priorities for 2024, the Police Accountability Boards, Maryland Horse Racing Act, the PFAS testing, and the Chesapeake Water Quality Goals.
I'd like to second that.
Motion's been made and seconded. Any questions on the motion? Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please by signal by saying aye.
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 Aye. All opposed? Motion carries. With that, I just want to take a moment to extend a word for our mayor, who could not be here tonight for a medical situation. He is in our prayers, he is in our thoughts this evening. He also just celebrated a birthday last week, and so I'd like to take a moment to say happy birthday to our wonderful mayor, Tim Adams. With that, are there any council announcements or points of order?
None for me.
Just a thank you to the staff for orchestrating this evening's meeting. I know it's a little extra and was not expected, so I appreciate all of your time and your effort getting it set up, as well as the time to be here this evening.
And I'll just say a word of gratitude to all my colleagues for getting this done. Our goal is to have this finished by the end of summer, and we got 3 days before the end of summer, so we're doing great, or at least 3 days before the end of August. So
Well,
thank you all for your work.
it
I
is
appreciate
done.
everything you do.
Everyone be safe Labor Day weekend.
Can I have a motion to adjourn, please?
I like to move to adjourn.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Thank you all. Have a good night.
Right. Very good, Michael.
That was reasonably painless.